It was Wilbur Wright who said, "The desire to fly is an idea handed down to us by our ancestors who, in their grueling travels across trackless lands in prehistoric times, looked enviously on the birds soaring freely through space at full speed above all obstacles on the infinite highway of the air." My guest, Kaity McKee, or Pilot Kaity as she is known, has a career on that great highway in the air. Kaity is a pilot and has a love for aviation that is evident as I spoke with her. Get ready to hit the skies, and perhaps we will hold a chicken along the way as well with my guest, Pilot Kaity McKee. Welcome to Journey with Jake. This is a podcast about adventure and how through our adventures we can overcome the challenges of life that come our way. While I expect you will learn some things about different adventures, this show will entertain you. Each episode will feature a different guest or guests as they share experiences and stories from the different adventures they have been on. Not only will you be entertained, but you will also hear the failures and trials each guest faces and what they have done or are doing to overcome the hardships that come their way. My goal is to take each of us on a journey through the experiences of my guests with the hope that you'll be entertained and inspired to overcome your day-to-day challenges. After all, it's not all about the destination as it is about the journey. Welcome back to another episode of Journey with Jake. I am your host, Jake Bushman, and it is so great to be back for another episode. Can you believe this is episode 129? I love doing this, and there are plenty more episodes coming your way. Before we get to my conversation with the talented pilot, Kaity McKee, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. I would also love it if you could leave me a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I am also on YouTube now. I'm not 100% sure what I'm doing on YouTube, but this does provide a way to watch the interview instead of just listening. And I have had a few listeners over the last couple of years ask for that. So I'm just trying to give the people what they want. Okay, so subscribe, check out YouTube, and oh yes, social media. Give me a follow on Instagram at Journey with Jake Podcast. For those of you that just listen to the show, this is a great way to see some snippets of the show so you can see what my guests look like. And I like to share a little bit about me on the personal side of things as well. So check it out at Journey with Jake Podcast. I was super excited I had the chance to visit with Kaity McKee. As someone who seeks out adventurous types, I found Kaity a while back and have enjoyed getting to see what she is about on social media. Her purpose is to help the aviation community, and she is doing that by sharing some tips and pointers as well as her life as a pilot. If you like this episode, you will also enjoy episode 56 about the thrilling world of paramotoring with Walker Beecraft. Okay, let's get to my conversation with pilot Kaity McKee. Well, I'm excited today. I have Kaity McKee, also known as Pilot Kaity, on the show with me today. Kaity, welcome to Journey with Jake.
Thanks for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm excited. Came across you on Instagram. You're someone who's adventurous in the fact that you're a pilot and you're out there flying around. You're showcasing it on Instagram and on social media too, which I think is cool. So that way people could kind of be part of that. And that's what I liked about your Instagram account. I felt like I was part of what you were doing. You were showing things like, here, now go with me as I fly to wherever. And it was kind of fun. So I enjoyed that. So I want to hear all about that. Before we dive into the whole pilot side of things for you, give us a little background, where you're from, where you grew up, that sort of thing, if you don't mind.
Sure. So I grew up kind of all over the place because my dad was in the Air Force actually as a pilot. So I was homeschooled, kind of lived all over the world. And then I ended up through going to college and all that kind of stuff. I ended up in the Army, went to high school in Georgia, which is kind of where I would claim as home now. But then ended up in the military just basically because I wanted to pay for college. I was really passionate about getting out of it without any debt. And I was also just like interested in the military service because of my family background. Through my time in the military, I actually ended up getting into flying, not in military aviation, but more kind of as an outlet because I was part of the first wave of women combat arms officers, which had a lot of challenges, as you can imagine. So I was kind of looking for an outlet. And my dad basically was like, just get your pilot's license. If you hate it, it still looks good on a resume, but it shows that you can like follow through on something. So I ended up starting to fly in Lawton, Oklahoma. And I was a student of a retired Air Force pilot. He was awesome, gave me really good quality instruction. And then I very quickly realized I didn't want to do the Army anymore and I wanted to fly full time. So made the jump over to that. It all kind of goes into flying because, my dad was ultimately kind of the catalyst that brought me into aviation.
Very good. So you have that background then as a kid. You saw your dad flying Air Force. Is he still in the Air Force, or is he still flying?
Yeah, so he still flies for a major airline. He retired from the Air Force a while ago. He's in his mid to late 60s. So he still flies. He really is passionate about aviation and has his own small plane that he works on, but he's just, he's really passionate about it and loves it. And my grandfather was actually a pilot as well. He was not a very good pilot, which is kind of like a family joke. He was more of a mechanic, but he was a rule breaker. He was a Marine Corps veteran and just did whatever he wanted. So he actually crashed a couple planes, and we have a lot of stories about his life where he would show up to dinner with his arms all scratched up, and we would realize that he left a plane in a tree somewhere and shimmied down the pine tree and just pretended it didn't happen. So kind of come from a background of wild aviators, but my dad is more professional and kind of a better pilot. So he really has kind of instilled the passion, and now my brother's also learning to fly. So it's kind of a cool family thing. My brother-in-law is going to start to learn to fly soon, and it's kind of something we can all talk about and just enjoy.
Wow. Okay. And I know you're married. Your husband, is he in aviation at all or no?
He's not. So he kind of is. We met through aviation. It's kind of funny. He was learning to fly in support of a charity that he has. So he has Good News Aviation, which is the aviation and security part of anti-human trafficking work. So he's really passionate about that. And he was kind of learning that part just so he could help in any way that he needs to, and also be involved if it was necessary for whatever work that they were doing. He was able to find other pilots for that organization. But initially, I was teaching him to fly, and we just kind of met and got married through that. And then he stopped learning to fly because he's like, well, this is kind of expensive and I don't really need to do it if everybody in the family is a pilot, and you guys can just fly me for fun. But we still fly together. I mean, he enjoys it, and we'll probably finish his license at some point. It's just it's not necessary for both of us to have it when we only fly together.
Right.
So yeah.
So even though doesn't have his license fully yet, you still met through aviation, though. Aviation still brought you together.
Yeah.
So that,
Kind
yeah,
of, it's a beautiful love story.
Exactly. I love it. That's awesome. What was it about aviation? I know it's kind of sounds like it's kind of in your blood, with grandparents and parents and family. What was it for you? You said it was an outlet. What do you mean by that? What did it do for you?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Thanks for asking, because a lot of people I talk about the whole women in combat arms and they just don't really want to know anymore, but it was a really stressful time in the military. It was kind of challenging. The unit that I was in, they had just put a bathroom in for women because the whole building didn't have a women's bathroom. So the bathroom would overflow every day because it was a broom closet that they transitioned. It was kind of just mandated, and a lot of people had a lot of negative opinions about it. And what they did was they took women, they put the officers first, just to see if the women could do a good job and it would work out. And they basically just took the top physical fitness score women and just put them into field artillery, which is the first branch they opened. So it was a lot of women that were kind of disappointed to be there. Some of them wanted to be pilots and some of them wanted to be JAG officers and other things. And we were all just there. And unfortunately, multiple of my friends did have issues with sexual assault. So it was a really stressful time. It was pretty transformative for me just because I was so impressed with the quality of the women that I served with. I remember we're going through this really challenging field artillery math course. So we would get up, we'd do PT in the morning, 4:30 to I think it was 7, and then we were getting to class at 8, 7:30 or 8, and then we would do math and gunnery and all these really challenging math problems. Everybody was stressed. Everybody was barely hanging on, trying to pass these tests, And I remember I walked into the bathroom. We had 5-minute break between class, and one of the other female officers was crying. I asked her why, and she told me that the person who had assaulted her, who was her commanding officer at her previous post, had been arrested, which was good that, justice was being done, but he had taken his own life in prison, and she had just found out about that. So
Wow.
we had 4 minutes in the bathroom where we talked about it. We wiped our faces and we walked out and went back to class, and nobody ever knew what we were dealing with, So that was the kind of thing that we were dealing with, and I would go fly on the weekends and just kind of get away. And it was just challenging. A lot of it was very positive as well, and I'm still glad that I did it. And I'm still, proud of the military, but obviously the negative experiences like tend to stick out more. So it was kind of something I just wanted to get off post. I wanted to get away. So I just decided I was going to train for a marathon and learn to fly just to be like doing something positive with my time. And getting into flying, I was pretty like high achiever at that point in my life. And I had a lot of self-efficacy, like believed I could accomplish a lot. But flying was the first thing where I was like, I don't know if I can do this. Like, this is really hard. And I am not sure that I can pass this. I am not sure I can learn to land this plane and like take all these tests and everything. So it was just really a cool experience to work through the process. And then when I was in Washington State, I did my solo cross country flights, which is basically where you go like as a student pilot from one airport to another. That's when I really fell in love with it because I had an awesome instructor again. His name was Joel, and he just had the perfect balance of like giving me enough information, but also kind of like pushing me to like go do it on your own. Like, you can do this kind of thing. So he reviewed my cross country flight planning and everything. And then he just was like, okay, like, how are you going to navigate? Okay, have fun, just kicked me loose in the plane. And I took off and I was flying north up the Puget Sound in Washington State. And it was just like this moment of like, I am alone in this airplane up in the sky, and I can, this is not that hard for me anymore. Like, I can do this. And I was just like, I love this, like it was so beautiful. It was so peaceful. And I'm a big outdoors person too. So I was like, I'm just seeing nature. It's just a whole different world up there, and you can just get away and just see the world from a perspective that most people don't get to experience, and that moment for me was pretty much where I was like, I want to do this for work every day because this is amazing.
It was interesting. You're talking about you weren't sure you could do it because it was hard. Like you have to pass all kinds of things. I think some people sit and think, people who maybe aren't pilots necessarily might think, well, anybody could be a pilot, it's a bus driver in the air or whatever. I've heard things that they say. No, there's things you have to learn. There's things you have to study. You have to know a lot about a lot of things, not just one specific thing. And then the fact that you did all that, you said, okay, I can do it. And you did it. And getting up, flying, what's it like? Is it when it's just you? Because you're doing your solo. Is it quiet? Is it just the hum of the engine? Are you just in present mode? Like what's it like when you're up there by yourself?
Yeah, my dad gave me good advice before the solo cross country. He's like, you're going to hear the engine make noises it's never made before. And it wasn't because it actually is, it's because you're paranoid and you're like a little on edge. So there is an element of that at first, but you get to a point where you don't want to be comfortable, but you want to be confident. So you're kind of not on edge in the plane, like, oh, what is that? What is the oil temp supposed to be there? Like, enough that you understand what's happening, and you've trained like emergency procedures enough that you feel like if something did happen, you're, equipped to handle it. And then it's just awesome. Like, you're just looking out the window. And even now, like, I flew up from Boise, Idaho, where I live, to Coeur d'Alene the other day, and I'm just crossing over the rivers and the mountains, and I'm just looking around. I'm like, I just never get sick of this. Like, I've been doing this for almost 10 years, and it's just so beautiful. And every flight's a little different, look, the weather's different. ATC assignments are different. Like, everything's a little different, and it's so peaceful, and feel grateful every time I fly, because I'm like, there is a certain level of privilege to get to this point, to even be able to pass an FAA medical, or like have a dad that was a pilot, all of that. And now I have a job that I enjoy. Most people can't say that.
You said a technical thing I want to ask you about. I think I know what it means. You said ATC something. Air traffic control? Is that what ATC stands for? Okay. Hey, I'm not.
Yes, you're a pro.
I know something.
Yes.
Okay, very good. So air traffic control, when you said ATC. Perfect. That's awesome that you have that place where you can kind of be who you are and kind of escape. Thank you for sharing what you shared about, that military experience. And I know you mentioned you did the military thing too to save money. I think one thing I read about you or saw that you got your pilot training, and it's expensive. But it looks like it wasn't as expensive for you. How did you manage that?
Yeah, so I was really passionate about doing it without loans. Like, I wanted to get through college without student loans because I'm a millennial, and I'm kind of the generation of people that have realized that, like, people told us, oh, just go to college. And now a lot of people have really extensive loans, and maybe they're not reaching the earning potential that like makes that enjoyable for them. So I was like in that headspace of like, I don't want any student loans. I also didn't really know what I wanted to do, even in college, even, in the military. I was like, I'm just kind of doing the next thing that's productive. And then with flying, I have always wanted to be a mom my whole life. And so I was like, at some point in my life when I'm married and have kids, like I may not want to fly full time because inherently like my body has to be in a seat, to do the thing. So I just had that in the back of my head where I was like, I don't want to, meet my future husband and like burden him with like, oh, I have $150,000 of flying loans, but like I don't want to work anymore. So I just was like, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do it without any debt, which is really hard because it's expensive. I mean, now it's probably $100,000 to get from zero to commercial pilot, which commercial pilot does not mean what most people think it means. Commercial pilot means you can be paid to fly. You're probably going to make $10,000 to $15,000 a year for the first couple years. So it's more like a doctor where it's like you're in residency, but you're not like making a bunch of money yet. So there's a process to get to where you're like, okay, these loans make sense. And some people, there is no choice. Loans are the best option. Some people, it's the fastest route. So there's no shade against that. It's just for me, like with the things I wanted out of life, I just didn't want to go that route. I just didn't want that risk. So I was living in Florida at the time, and I was fortunate enough to find this light sport school. So a light sport airplane, to most people, it looks just like a normal like trainer airplane, but it's just a lighter plane. So it has a lower like max weight that it can be. And so it's certified differently by the FAA. So to be a light sport CFI, which is a certified flight instructor, you don't have to have all the other ratings, which is what we call like licenses in aviation. So like to make money as a pilot in aviation, you have to have like so many licenses to get to that point, and that's normally what costs $100,000. But this light sport CFI route, you can just kind of take your private check ride. You can just do a little bit more training and take another check ride, and then you can start teaching people in these like smaller planes. Well, for logging time, which everything in aviation is like, how many hours do you have? It logs the same. So I was able to start instructing at a much lower time. So I had spent almost no money on my training, and then I started getting paid to fly people, and I can log the flight time. So it was a huge hack, and I'm super fortunate. I just happened to live in that town, where that was one of the biggest light sport schools in the country. And a lot of people have questions about this because I feel like that was a very fortunate experience I had, and I try to like put that info out. There's also people can do gliders, like you can get your commercial glider license before you're a pilot, and that time can help build to get you into aviation cheaper. So I just think it's kind of like my duty now to like share this and give back to aviation, because I did all of it for under $35,000. And that's like all the way from no training to an ATP, which is an airline transport pilot license, which is what most people think of as a commercial license. Like that's the license to fly an airliner. And most people that's going to cost over $100,000. So,
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. When I think of
yes.
people becoming a pilot, yeah, it's 100,000 or more. That's kind of what's in my mind of how much this is going to cost, and every time you're going up, it's costing you so much money. And yeah, wow,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Well, good for you. That's awesome that you found that hack.
Very fortunate, like I said, because like I just kind of kept knocking on doors and stumbled into it. And I mean, people can apply it all over the country if they wanted to. It's just kind of a different route where you're going to have to be a little bit of a hustler to like build up a student base and make this work. But if you really have that priority of like, I just want to save money, this could really help some people.
So you've been doing this, you said, for about 10 years. So people probably want to know, what are you doing? Like, what was your kind of path after you got your training and everything and you instructed for a while? What was your path?
Yeah, so I got my light sport CFI, then I was working full time. I then got the rest of my licenses that I needed. So I got, my multi-engine, blah, 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 all the other instructor stuff. And then at that point, I was kind of like, okay, I want to make a reasonable amount of money where I can actually like live at some point. Like it would be nice. I would like to have health insurance, someday. So I found another flight instructor job, which was out in Colorado, and it is for the Air Force initial flight training and screening, which is like where Air Force pilots and Air Force drone pilots will go before they go to pilot training. So it's for the people that don't have any experience. They get in like a little trainer airplane before they get into the faster stuff. So it teaches them like the basics of flight. So when worked there, that was a great experience, and it really taught me a lot. I mean, the Air Force is obviously the best of the best in pilot trainings. Being an instructor for them, it taught me so much just from my peers and the kind of people I was working with and the way that they trained. And then I ended up moving on to what is called the Part 135 world, but this is just like private aviation, like charters, which means like anybody can book this flight and be like, hey, can you take me to Vegas or whatever. Worked for that for a while. That's when I moved to Idaho. And I was living in Georgia at the time, but I really wanted to get out to either Idaho, Wyoming, or Montana because I just love the outdoors and the mountains and everything. And I just that's like where I wanted to end up. So I started calling just airport operators I called the Boise airport. I called like some in Montana. I was like, hey, do you have any pilot jobs that are hiring? And one in Boise was like, yeah, we have so-and-so that's hiring. So interviewed, got hired by them, and then moved out to Boise, did private charters for a while. Then I went over to flying air ambulance. So it's basically medevac, but it's just in like a airplane instead of a helicopter. And then I did that. And then when I was working there, I was also contract flying for the company I work for now. And then they just kind of called me up and were like, hey, we need somebody full time. Do you want to come on and work for us? So it's called corporate aviation in aviation, but it's really like private for a company. So we don't fly for the general public. We fly for like the owners of our company if they want to go on vacation or if their employees need to look at, a real estate opportunity or whatever it is. So I love it.
Very good. Okay, cool. And I've got a little bit of relationship with that. My brother-in-law does this. He's a corporate pilot as well.
Cool.
So he flies for a company here in Utah. So I understand that part a little bit, but it's interesting though that you did the air ambulance for a little bit with the fixed plane wing or a fixed wing plane. Is that how you say it? I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. Instead of a helicopter.
Yeah.
But then you also did little charter stuff as well then. Okay.
Yeah. So a little bit of everything.
So is it like people basically renting the plane to like, hey, I want to go somewhere, and they kind of rent it, and that's kind of how it works?
Yeah. It would be like some of the people we'd fly, be like, hey, we have a bachelor party in Vegas and we all want to go. So they'd all like split the cost of it, fly them down to Vegas. Some people were like, if it makes sense for them for business purposes, they would do it, or, parties or whatever. Some people would just charter from their house in Idaho to their house in Havasu. Like that's just where some people are at in life. So that's what we did.
Right. Yeah.
And it was just whatever their needs were. But for that, the charter side is like the general public can just call up this company and be like, hey, we need a flight from Idaho to Telluride, and we'll book it and do all that. Whereas what I do now is more like it's just the owner and their plane, and then we just take them. So a little bit different, but it's a little easier because we're not, the purpose of our aviation now is not to make money. So we're not like just, okay, we need to book as many flights as possible. It's just like we just work at the needs of the owner, and our schedule's a little bit better.
Oh, that's good. Very nice. With working for that company, do you have do they kind of try to give you a set schedule? Is there any time where hey, the owner needs to go somewhere tomorrow? Can you, do you have any of that? What happens there?
We have that maybe once every 2 years.
Okay.
It's not very common. Other private aviation, like that can happen, and that can be the downside of it, that people are like, the airlines would be better because your schedule is pretty set. But for my particular company, quality of life is important. It's just me and the chief pilot. So we just talk, hey, what do you want to work this week? Like, do you have any personal family dinners or whatever that you need to be at? Do you have any doctor's appointments? And we just build the schedule, and most of the owners are pretty good about giving us what they need like 2 months out. And then we just kind of staff what we need and go from there. We also have a couple contract pilots. So if we are really busy, then we'll just have somebody take that flight for us. But there's a little shuffling. I mean, that's kind of the point, why do you own an airplane if it's not like, hey, so-and-so is in the hospital, like I need to get to Salt Lake or whatever, so we understand that. Or like, hey, my commercial flight got canceled, like I need to get to LA right now. Like that happens, and that's why you own an airplane,
For sure. Yeah, I would think so. That's why they've got the resources to do that, to have a plane, to have pilots.
Yeah.
Might as well take advantage of it and use it.
It's not very often, because that's where it would get kind of challenging, because then you're like, well, can I ever like have a beer? Like, or am I, on call? Like, so that's where, we try to avoid that, just because then you need to have time away where you're like, I have no obligations to work,
Yeah. Can't be tethered to it all the time.
Yeah.
For sure.
Right.
Makes sense. That's interesting. That's what you're doing now. You touched a little bit about, actually like major airlines. Have you ever thought about going that route? Because I think when people think about, hey, I want to be a pilot, they think of, oh, I want to fly for United or Delta or American or whatever. that's kind of where people's train of thought goes. I know that's where mine went when I was a kid. What are your thoughts on that? Do you ever have any desire to do that, or do you like where you're at?
Yeah, so this is one thing I go back and forth so much on my career path because that is kind of the goal. Most people are like, I want to build my time. The US has a rule you have to have 1,500 total hours before you can even get the airline transport pilot license. You've already been kind of grinding for a couple years and not making much, and like you want to get to that airline. Airline pilots make a lot of money, and they don't work much. So it's a really good job. But I mean, it's 20, 30 years into a career where they've been working and like building experience to that point. So most people are like, I want to get to an airline. Yeah, like I said, my goal, even when I was like 24, when I started this, was like, I really want to be a mom and I want to have the option to be home with my kids. So I don't know if I want to do the airline thing. So I was always kind of on the search for that like stay at home pilot job, which is really hard to find. I mean, most of them you're going to be on the road. Like that's kind of airplanes move other places, kind of what they do. That I found that here. But oddly enough, I'm like, would it have made more sense to go back, get to an airline? Like I just got married in January and we don't have kids yet. So it's like I could have been doing the airlines for like 10 years and then probably gone over to like the same thing I'm in. But you just don't know that. So I go back and forth, and my advice to people now, especially when they're young, even women, I'm like, just go directly to an airline as quick as possible. If you hate it, you can always go do other things, but airlines is kind of the top of the pyramid. So, like, go there and try it, and your experience will help you get into something better in corporate aviation or whatever. So, that's kind of where I'm at with that. I may at some point in the future, like, go to an airline, but it would probably be a long time down the road because now I'm just in that phase where it's like we're trying to be home more, and the priorities are just not with being on the road like 14 days out of the month. So
Well, and I respect that. I respect the fact that you want to have a family and you want to do that sort of thing. So that's awesome. I have much respect for that. That's great.
yeah,
Love it.
pros and cons to everything.
Yeah,
I mean, and
absolutely.
I just didn't know at the time, but now I'm like, yeah, the airlines probably would have made sense even with my goals, but like who knows. So
Right.
you learn
Yeah.
throughout your career like what's best, and obviously I'm super happy with where I am now, so it all worked out.
Do you have any stories or experiences you could share? Maybe a certain flight that was memorable or anything like that? Or have you ever had any close calls, anything like that?
Well, there's just like so many. I mean, I have had a couple emergencies. Like that's pretty like not I wouldn't say common, but what we call an emergency is really just anything out of the norm. So I know like some people are really afraid of flying and I totally understand that. Like it's very hard to give control to someone else like that. But even something where it's like, "Oh, hey, the gear didn't come up all the way." Like we would call that an emergency. So I've had some things like that, but I've had bad weather. I mean, the air ambulance thing, you're always in horrible weather into the mountains in the middle of the night with a person in the back that's in a bad place. So a lot of stuff like that. But, there's nothing crazy that stands out. I will say, like, the favorite flights I've had so far was I took the Pilatus PC-12, which is one of the planes I fly now, into Stanley, Idaho, which is like this little backcountry kind of half gravel, like a little bit of pavement strip up in the mountains. So a lot of pilots can't go in there because they're not allowed to land on something that's not a paved runway for their insurance. So I've done some backcountry flying in the Pilatus. I've done like Smiley Creek, which is another like little grass runway up in the mountains of Idaho. Garden Valley is another one. And those are cool because it's high level flying. So it's fun for me to like really be like, okay, I can put this plane down on this little strip of grass in the mountains, like in this valley. But then it's also just so beautiful because you come up over the mountains, you're probably at like 13 or 14,000 feet. And then you just drop down into the valley and you're just like, is this real life? Like, this is so beautiful. And then you land on this little tiny gravel or grass runway. You get out, like maybe you go into town and there's like one little restaurant, and you're just in the middle of nowhere in Idaho. And it's just like, this is freaking cool. Like, this is cool. I also got my seaplane rating, which was another fun one. I want to fly seaplanes for one summer, like so bad. That's like one of my goals. But I went down to Florida and I did my seaplane rating with a company called Florida Seaplanes. And that was fun too, because the guy has his seaplane is on the dock in his house. Like he lives on a lake. So we just got on the dock, got on the plane, took off on the lake, and like went over to other little rivers in Florida. And it was just this sense of freedom where you're like, oh, I can just land on this lake. I can land in this little canal we would land and then go to these little dockside restaurants and have like fried gator. And it was just so cool. You're like, my life is just a movie right now. Like, I just feel so fortunate to be doing this. So those are probably my favorite. Like a couple weeks ago, also, I took the Citation CJ4, which is one of the jets that we fly, into Friday Harbor, Washington, which is a really short runway. And I think I don't think any other jets land there. Like, we might be the only one. So that was really cool, just like taking that jet in there and just landing on this little runway and then just kind of getting out and being like, wow, I did that. So those are some off the top of my head, but there's just honestly so many that I just can't even that was part of the social media thing. Is I was like, I want like a living photo album of all these experiences, because I look back now and I'm like, oh, that one was cool. That one was cool, so there's just too many to even count, honestly.
No, and those are great stories. And I know you said you're someone who loves the outdoors. So I think when you fly up in
Mm-hmm.
those little mountain places, little grass strip in the middle of the mountains, that's got to be just awesome too. Because then you get out and, like you said, you go into town or whatever. But do you have time then to kind of look at your scenery that you're in, even when you're not in the plane?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we will, like, if I have no like hard time to be back with it, like I'll just go hang out. I mean, at my company, I can like put a paddleboard in the back of the plane. I can like hang out as long as I want and then come home, if I'm on an empty leg. So we've also done some airport camping up there. So one of my friends that they own an airplane, they will just stage a car at Smiley Creek throughout the summer. So we'll either, drive up or like fly in, and then we'll all just camp on the airport. We'll get in their little beater car and like go hike all day. And then we'll go into town, have dinner, and have a couple drinks by the fire, and then get up the next day and like fly back to Boise. And it's just awesome.
Great. And then the whole, doing the whole seaplane thing and pulling off to a dockside place where you're
Yeah.
eating gator. That's just, those are the type of things where you're just like, wow, I can't, the memories
Mm-hmm.
you create and, the things that
Yeah.
come from that. Fantastic. You talked about your social media, Pilot Kaity. That's where we can find you on
Mm-hmm.
Instagram. Yeah. What was the purpose? You said part of it's just to kind of keep a record of what you've done, but what else, what's the reasoning behind the whole social media for you?
Yeah. So I started the TikTok during the pandemic because aviation kind of stopped. So I was like, let's see if this is something that I could kind of build up something to do with this. I don't know. I just had time and I was doing a lot of flying, but I wasn't doing much else during the pandemic. So I started it and it kind of blew up on TikTok because there wasn't a lot of people showing aviation on there. And then I put it aside for a couple years just because it is kind of weird to like be so out there in the world. Like, it is kind of a vulnerable thing just to put your face out on the internet and your name. So I felt a little weird about it. And then I just kept the accounts. Like, I had the Instagram, I had the TikTok. And when I met my husband, he was like, no, this is really cool. Like, he's like, I love to teach people with flying. Like, I love instructing. And he's like, you're really like instructing millions of people through these videos. And he's like, think about like, the knowledge that you're passing on. Like, you could like genuinely save somebody's life or help them be a better pilot, like just from these videos. And I thought that was really cool. So that was kind of the perspective I had with it, and picked it back up. And so, the whole account is kind of about like helping the aviation community. It's also just like showing the joy of flying. Unfortunately, some people do not have the experience I had with flight training. So I try to put out like cautionary tales. Some people have had, really bad, where the school will like take their money and like close their doors and like disappear. Some people, they just don't know which way to go. They're like, do I go to this big aviation college? It's going to be, $300,000, but they say like, I'm going to get a good job. And like, people just need the mentorship. And like, I was so fortunate where it's like, I have my dad that I can call and be like, hey, my instructor said this, it doesn't sound right. And he can clear it up real quick. So I try to give that to other people. And I try to answer like a lot of messages and, do podcasts. And then we started the YouTube thing because I can make these videos on like state of the industry. Okay, who's hiring, because I just realized like I have a lot of people I know in different parts of aviation, and just putting it all together. So that I do some vlogs on YouTube where I just kind of show like, oh, here's the flight, like this is what I'm doing. And then I just, whatever topic comes up, if people are asking about, like people asked a lot about like, oh, how did you pay for flight training for $35,000? So I'll put a lot out on that. People ask a lot about like just different specific things. Like I'm going to make a YouTube video here about like how to land the plane, because I have a lot of student pilots that are like, I'm struggling with that last like 10 feet, like I just can't get it. And I kind of have like figured out how to instruct that to my students one-on-one. So I'm like, I'm just going to make a video and everybody can watch this and maybe this will help them. Because like you said, it's, $300-$400 an hour to like rent a plane and an instructor.
Yeah.
You know, that if that saves them a couple hours in the plane, like that could really make a difference. So I also like have been able to link up with some scholarship organizations. So I'm able to help right now with a company called Aerial Tribute Project, and they're giving out 2 scholarships in a couple months. And right now I'm on the board, so I'm reading everybody's applications and of course like crying my eyes out because they're amazing stories. So it's just been really cool, and it's just kind of like it's kind of gone from there, but it was just initially just me wanting to share my passion of aviation and help people, help people love it as much as I do and not have a negative experience with it.
That's awesome. And I enjoy it. I've been looking at some of your videos and posts on Instagram and a little bit on YouTube, and it's been a lot of fun for me. So I really enjoy it. One thing I do have to ask you about that I kind of came across, I think it was on Instagram. What's with you and chickens? What's the scoop?
The chickens, man. Just have a lot of chickens. How did I start with chickens? I don't know. I just like wanted to get chickens, and I remember what it was. Okay, the house I was living in, the previous owners had a chicken that they like left at the house. So her name was Henny Penny. So then from there, I was like, well, I'm going to get more baby chickens. So I got 6. And then when my husband and I got married, we moved into our house that we're in now, and it was on an acre. And so we're like, well, now we have 17 chickens, So I don't know. Like, it's just, I'm a crazy chicken lady. They're cute, and we get eggs for free. We give them to like all my neighbors. Like,
That's awesome.
it is what it is. Yeah.
I think something too, you said something about like holding a chicken, you can't be upset, or you can't, I don't know. So there's some phrase I think you're goofing around with. But
they're little like little fluffy dopamine hits,
Yeah, it just makes you happy. I love that.
Right.
All right. So sorry, I know I kind of sidetracked us there, but I just thought I seen you with chickens. I'm like, what's with these chickens?
They're very cute. My niece and nephew are like really little, so they always like FaceTime me and they're like, we want to see your titins, which is what they call them. We're like, okay. We'll go look at the titins. Yeah. So
that's great.
It's just fun.
As you move forward now, and you've been flying you got a career going on, you're married now, all that stuff that's going on. What would you say are the challenges you face day to day? Kind of what's the difficulties with it?
Right now, it's just a lot about balance. Like, because we're really, we're doing the whole YouTube channel. We actually just hit 10,000 subscribers today.
Congratulations.
Which was
awesome.
It was so cool for us because we're like, because YouTube is really hard to figure out. Like we were saying before we recorded this, it's like the editing is really hard. My husband has like taught himself how to be basically a professional video editor. But we like it because you can put out longer videos. Like you can do a whole flight, So we built that, but it's just really cool to like put the effort in and like have people like it, like getting to that like 10,000 number, even though it doesn't really mean anything. It was just kind of a cool milestone. But he's working full time. He works in real estate investing. I work full time. And then we basically have this other like social media, like full-time job thing that we're doing, which I really enjoy. And I think eventually like I'll probably be able to transition to that full-time, and we may like eventually buy our own small plane and be able to just do that and like do charitable flights and stuff. Who knows? But I mean, it's just balance right now. Like I feel like I have so many people that I want to help, like so many people that say, oh, I actually live in the Treasure Valley. Like, can we go get coffee? And I'm like, I want to do this every day, and like give you and like mentor you in aviation. I can only do like maybe one a month, So trying to figure out like how to say no is like one of them right now. But my job is great. I mean, I have a lot of balance with that. So it does allow me time to like do all these other things. But this past week was a little much. We were like having one of those weeks where you're like, how do I like exercise, feed myself, keep the house clean, do the social media, do the job, feed the chickens, So it's just balance. And we're super involved in our church too. So we're like, we want to do all these things, and there's just not enough hours in the day. But it's also a good problem to have because like it's good to just have things that you're passionate about and that give you energy back, and you want more time to do them. So those are really the challenges right now. As far as like in aviation, I just enjoy it. I feel like there are some challenges. None of them are really even negative enough to like mention compared to how much I've gotten out of it,
Great points that you brought up. And yeah, I think balancing, I mean, I'm kind of in the same boat when I, doing Journey with Jake and having a day job and having a family, and, it's just, there's a lot for sure. And trying to, YouTube, I'm totally lost. So yeah, I might have to talk to your husband about that. See if he can square me away.
It's so hard.
So when I was little and I was a kid, I I loved, seeing pilots at the airport was like the coolest thing, and I remember when I was a kid, and I'm sure I'm older than you. So I know when I was a kid, they're always men, and now
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot more women. Like I go on flights, all commercial flights now, and a lot of times the main captain is a woman. As a woman yourself, do you still see it like mostly? I mean, I think it's probably still a majority men. Maybe I'm wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but it seems like it's a lot more women are in it now.
Yeah, it's definitely become more so. It's still right now that for the past year, 6% of airline transport pilots are women. So it's still mostly
Still
men.
really low. Okay.
It's still really low. And, some of that, like, who knows why that is? Like, is that just because women are more interested in different things? Like, like I said, it wasn't a societal thing that I really wanted to prioritize being a mom. That was just part of me. Is that individual? Is that gender related? Who knows? But I mean, I'm kind of where I feel like if someone is capable, like they should be able to do what they want to do. What I like about aviation is like the check rides that we take, it's like there's a standard for all the maneuvers. So if you do a steep turn, everybody has to do it, plus or minus 100 feet, plus or minus 10 knots. There's a phrase that is basically the airplane doesn't care, which kind of means like your excuses are invalid against the laws of aerodynamics. I think that's great. If people are interested in it, whatever their gender, race, whatever, go ahead and do it. And if you can fly the airplane, like that's the ultimate standard and you can pass these tests. I think there are some barriers when you're the only person that looks like you in a room. It can be inherently uncomfortable and you have to be a very confident person to be able to navigate that. There's definitely some challenging situations I've faced. Like even this past week, I was like running a conversation by my husband and I'm like, I don't know if I handled this right, but like, I really am annoyed that I even have to think about this right now, and it's annoying. But then at the other side, I'm like, am I, do men have the same challenges on a different side? Like, because now we do have a little bit more of diversity hiring. So I've heard a lot of guys say that they have a hard time getting hired just because they aren't a woman or a person of color. I don't really know how that's statistically possible when it's still 94%. So I don't know. To me, I'm like, I don't care. And the thing I love about aviation is like, in most industries, it's like people respect someone who's good at their job. So if you are good at your job and you're excellent and you are, nice to people and reasonable and you're not difficult to work with, I think that goes a long way. I have had, instances in aviation where I've had to kind of like mentor younger girls. Like I did have a student where her flight instructor kept like touching her knee in the plane and just like weird things like that. She was 17. So her mom called me because I was the only female instructor in this area. And she interviewed me for maybe 45 minutes because she's like, we are not having this experience again. So that girl, she's now at an aeronautical university and she's on the path to graduate in a couple years and be an airline pilot. And if I hadn't been an instructor, she would not have continued. So that's just kind of some of the things that people run into. But I think it's also important to note that like you can be a self-fulfilling prophecy sometimes. And if you're like, I'm discriminated against, like I need to, then you're probably creating that because you're probably coming in with maybe like this confrontational attitude, or maybe you're thinking of something that someone said the wrong way. So it's kind of a fine balance. And aviation, just like a lot of other industries, there's some different demographics. Not everybody looks the same, and that's fine. Who can fly the airplane? It should be about merit, it should be about skill level, and ultimately it should be about safety. So this is the general public that we're moving through the sky in a metal tube, and we do not care what color your skin is. We care about your proficiency, and that really should be the number one. So, and that goes for gender too. So I have seen a lot of initiatives for like women in aviation. I think that's great. I mean, if there's some kind of barrier where like, a little girl has never seen a female pilot, so she didn't even think about it, and then she sees one and maybe she gets into aviation because of that, great. Or like with my student where, she had a female instructor, so she felt safe and comfortable enough to actually learn how to fly, and instead of, worry about her instructor being a creep, like great. But, also I've had a great experience. Like, people are generally not horrible in the world, and there's a lot of positive out there. So all of that stuff's important to just kind of find the balance through all of it.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. I think you're right. If someone's professional, they're nice, and they can fly the plane and do it safely, that's what you need. That's what
Yeah.
it comes down to. Who cares what
Most
they look
people,
like or who they
yeah,
are or whatever?
most,
Absolutely. Definitely. Love that. Well, this has been awesome for me, getting to know you a little bit better. seeing your passion for aviation. Thanks for not being too technical, so I wasn't totally lost.
Yeah.
I appreciate that too. Just as a last minute thought for you, then, if there's some young guy or girl out there who's thinking about possibly getting into this, what kind of like words of advice would you give them if they're contemplating, hey, I want to be a pilot, but not sure what to do? What would you tell them?
Yeah, that's a good question. Something I've learned throughout the years is aviation is really about the community. So finding a mentor is super important. Obviously we're flying planes and it's kind of a little bit of an antisocial thing when you're up there in the sky, but the aviation community really pulls you through. So FaceTime is important. Go to the airports, like go and hang out. Talk to people, ask people about their experiences. People love to talk about flying. They love to talk about aviation, and people like to help and give back to young aviators. So it is a very old school industry. So going in person, like with a paper resume, dressed professionally, that goes a long way in this industry. Get a mentor, get face to face, and just try to get a full spectrum of what it really looks like, and just reach out to the community for support, because I think that's the people that have had the most positive experiences that have really dug into the aviation community in general.
Excellent. Kaity, thank you so much for coming on Journey with Jake.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much to Kaity McKee for coming on the show and sharing her journey into aviation and her love for flying. You can follow along with Kaity on Instagram at Pilot Kaity, and Kaity is spelled Kaity. And check her out on YouTube also at Pilot Kaity. Once again, I am inspired and grateful that I was able to have another fantastic guest in Kaity McKee. Thank you so much, Kaity. And thanks to all of you, the listeners. It means so much that you tune in to listen each and every week. Let me know what adventures or journeys you would like to hear about, or if you have someone you think would be a great guest, let me know as well. You can email me directly to jake@journeywithjake.net or direct message me on Instagram at JourneyWithJake Podcast. We have another great episode next week. I had the chance to speak with Sarah Diener, who is an unattached athlete participating in collegiate track and field. What is an unattached athlete? I had the same question. Tune in next week to hear another great episode with Sarah Diener on Journey with Jake. Just remember, it's not always about the destination as it is about the journey. Take care, everybody.